Right now, a fleet of NASA spacecraft are turning their attention to an unusual object speeding through our solar system. It's a comet, now named 3I Atlas, and it's only the third object ever confirmed to have come from interstellar space.
On a quiet night in September 2025, the stars suddenly went silent. The world's most advanced telescopes, from Hawaii to Chile, froze mid-frame. Data vanished, feeds went dark, and a cryptic message appeared across every observatory screen.
This is a raw image, so this is not even this is just directly from the telescope right now.
You're looking at a piece of what would have become a planet in another star system. This is a building block from somebody else's home.
Operational security. Within minutes, NASA's own stream was offline. Rumors spread faster than light. What had 3I/ATLAS done that forced Space Force to censor the sky? Today, we'll uncover the blackout that shook astronomy, expose hidden protocols, and raise one haunting question. What were they trying to hide? The night the sky went dark. It began as a quiet night, the kind that astronomers live for. September skies were clear from Mauna Kea to Paranal, the atmosphere steady, the data streams perfect. But at 3:12 UTC, something happened that no one could explain. One by one, telescope feeds began freezing mid-frame. In Hawaii, the Pan-STARRS operators thought it was a network hiccup. In Chile, technicians double-checked cables, systems, and servers. Yet it wasn't a glitch. Every telescope tracking 3I/ATLAS, the interstellar object that had captured the world's attention, went dark at the same instant. Screens flashed, data unavailable, monitors locked on timestamps that refused to move, and for the first time in years, the night sky went silent. Within minutes, the panic spread. Observatory group chats lit up with screenshots and frantic messages. Amateur astronomers across Europe and Asia posted identical results, blank images, frozen clocks, and no return signal. Even NASA's public dashboard displayed a simple, chilling phrase: feed interrupted. Operational security. That last part hit harder than any technical term. Operational security meant the military had stepped in. It meant the blackout wasn't random. It was deliberate. The sense of disbelief was instant and universal. Scientists who had spent months tracking 3I/ATLAS, logging every flicker, every microflare, suddenly found themselves blind. The first hashtag that appeared was #, where is Atlas around 0320 UTC. The tag was trending globally just 60 minutes after. The nourishment with streams of citizen feeds and the amateur telescope recordings was still unusable and began to exhibit weird distortions and pixelated static. Some users were of the opinion that it was interference caused by a solar event. Some others were convinced that it was their equipment that was hacked. The coincidences were too neat when NASA's live solar observatory feed also went offline. News outlets were desperate to get in touch with official sources, but too bad they turned out to be just machines. Operational review in progress. No threat to public safety. The response was of the type to reassure everyone, but instead it was a call to chaos. The guru mantra, a restoring power that proceeds from all of the been there, done that, made the situation tolerable and even acceptable. Although it wasn't any of the so-called known resources and tools, the plan seemed to be a real silver bullet that came over people themselves in the meantime. A series of missiles in the form of growing awareness and grassroots movement passed through slow and hard to understand at the beginning lightning speed circles, and before you knew it, everybody from the Earthlings and UFO followers with their metal dicks to the other likely Earth's wiretaps were alive and kicking. Also, the persons or groups being the most suspicious have turned around and become the key in the transitional process. The language kept changing, and the right and wrong points weren't always easy to spot. For several weeks now, the human world had almost lost the quietness of space. It was a place of open light, live streams, and amazement shared by everybody. On that evening, however, the stars could not be more submissive. The slow days became weeks, and the internet again streamed while the information was still lost. The telescopes were put back online, and 3I/ATLAS had disappeared from their view, a shining object seen far away, now a small dot. The given reason? A sunspot event. However, the explanation was not taken seriously. Solar flares don't pick on telescopes. They don't delete past data or block access to stored secrets. Yet beneath the static and silence, something far stranger had taken place. An event so powerful that even sunlight seemed to react to it. The brightness surge no one could explain. Before the blackout, there was a flash. It lasted only minutes, but it changed everything. Telescope logs captured the moment 3I/ATLAS suddenly brightened, 12 times brighter than it had been just an hour before. To most, that number might sound technical, but in astronomy, a 12-fold luminosity surge is the kind of event that makes professionals stop breathing. The data wasn't gradual or erratic. It was exact. In graph form, the curve shot upward like a vertical line, peaked sharply, and then began to drop, right before the feeds went dark. It wasn't a fading comet or a dusty flare. It was precision, controlled, almost intentional. Photometric data streamed from multiple sites, Chile, Hawaii, the Canary Islands, all showing the same impossible reading. At 0309 UTC, a small spike. At 311, the slope steepened, and by 312, 3I/ATLAS was blazing with the intensity of a small nova. Spectrographic charts confirmed the signal was real, not a sensor glitch. The photon count overwhelmed filters designed to handle the brightest comets. Operators scrambled to adjust exposures, but within seconds, the instruments locked, overloaded. Then the screens froze, and the blackout began. Solar physicists gave the explanation a try and said that the volatile ices on the surface of the object might have been vaporized by the solar blast. However, the numbers came, and the theory was nowhere to be found. The usual behavior of comets includes changes in brightness that are usually very gradual, light curves that are irregular in shape, and a slowly disappearing debris trail. 3I/ATLAS never gave any indication of the SED or any other typical signs. No enlargement of the coma, no jets of gas, no cloud of dust. Its brightness just increased and dropped off sharply, almost in a geometrical manner. The event did not result in an explosion, but rather in a signal. Some researchers silently proposed that idea. A light curve that went up and down with a sequence of numbers suggested something more orderly than chaotic. The rise time was 1 exact minute and 13 seconds. The decay was so close to being the same that fractions only separated them. In nature, it is very rare for such a high level of symmetry to emerge. The use of adaptive pixel-to-pixel photometry showed that the photometry filters were right. No sky brightness changes from the atmosphere, and no satellite light was reconstructing the event. Yet, when those results came to the network, the servers began to return errors. The archives that contained the raw data for the entire archive suddenly went missing. Even the cached backups disappeared too. The situation afterward was quite confusing and full of quietness. What was once a clear presentation of data on the public dashboard had now been replaced by a message: operational review pending. The discourse in the community was quite different, as the astronomers were more enthusiastic in their description of the event as a blink from the dark. Some even brought up the mysterious acceleration of Oumuamua hundreds of thousands of kilometers away from Earth several years ago as a similar case that happened, and yet the size of the debate on whether it was a cause of any kind of natural force or not. But this time, the case was more complicated. The information was not just incomplete, it was purposefully deleted. But as the light faded, something even more baffling emerged, a metallic fingerprint that didn't belong in any comet known to science. The nickel signature mystery. When the feeds finally flickered back online, the image of 3I/ATLAS was gone. But the fragments of data that survived told a story stranger than anyone expected. A handful of independent observatories had managed to cache partial spectral frames before the blackout, and buried deep within those fragments, analysts found something that defied every rule of cometary chemistry: a sharp, unmistakable nickel emission line. Nickel. Not traces, not noise, but a distinct signature that stood out even through corrupted data. In normal comets, nickel appears only in microscopic amounts, often masked by more common elements like oxygen, carbon, or sodium. Even when detected, it's weak, the faint whisper of metal in a cloud of dust. But the signature from 3I/ATLAS was powerful, pure, and unnervingly consistent. The ratios didn't fit. There was no matching iron line to balance it, no expected thermal spread to explain how the element stayed so prominent in a body supposedly frozen for eons. To put it in perspective, the only natural way to get that kind of nickel emission would be through extreme heating, temperatures high enough to melt metal outright. And yet 3I/ATLAS was millions of kilometers away, far too cold for that. The object wasn't near the sun when it brightened. It shouldn't have been releasing metallic vapors at all. To scientists who saw the data before it disappeared, the conclusion was haunting. This wasn't a comet behaving badly. It was something else entirely. At the appearance of the first interstellar visitor, Oumuamua, in 2017, the experts were surprised because of its weird space shape, as well as the sudden increase in speed. It was even in the rock camp. There was another opinion that it could be alien technology. However, the object being so peculiar, Oumuamua, it never gave off pure nickel. It was like nothing from the old times or the new ones, but rather from a different world of elements, and not even one we know of on Earth. ALI's presence on Earth would have been an alien-unfriendly experience, and 3I/ATLAS's visit was just that. Chemical. There was a second gasp, the change in the course. The spot where astronomers placed the object did not match its new path when the telescopes continued to monitor for the next few hours. The object had changed its orbit by 180 kilometers or more, and it was not due to the loss of gas or the sun's wind pressure. This was a tactical move. If an acceleration is involved in the movement of celestial bodies, it usually takes time. And not like this, not that fast, not precisely. The data detected that there was some motion with a purpose. There came an urgent shift in discussions among researchers. Teams at the European Southern Observatory and NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory started to silently dispute whether the nickel reading might be a calibration error or a data corruption artifact. However, the consensus was reinforced by the cross-checks from 3 different observatories, all of which pointed to the nickel's presence. The fact that it was detected at different wavelengths made the possibility of a random occurrence very low. Atlas's 3I then brought back that old fear. A metallic signature that could have no similarities in nature, a weird course diversion that appeared deliberate, and a data blackout that eliminated the clues. Those 3 together unraveled too disturbing a picture for most to grasp. Some of the observers who worked independently from the main body of the research community were even beginning to pose the most feared question. What if the brightening was not nature's accident, but nature's or something else's intended reaction? Still, the question wasn't just what 3I/ATLAS was, but why every record of it vanished so quickly. The answer lay buried inside Space Force's hidden network. Inside the Space Force guillotine. To understand how the 3I/ATLAS blackout could unfold in perfect synchrony across continents, you have to look deep inside the digital veins of Space Force's observation grid. a global web of telescopes, satellites, and sensors built for far more than scientific curiosity. These systems were designed not only to track debris or comets, but to monitor, classify, and, if necessary, control the flow of information about what's seen in space. At the heart of that system lies a classified mechanism that insiders refer to in whispers as the guillotine. The guillotine isn't a single device, it's a network protocol, a switch embedded across observatories tied into the national defense infrastructure. When triggered, it can reroute data streams in under a second, redirecting public telescope feeds away from open networks and into encrypted military channels. On the user's screen, the effect looks harmless, a frozen image, an error message, maybe a delay. But in reality, the live data is still flowing, just no longer to civilian servers. What looks like silence is actually redirection. The engineers who contributed to the establishment of these systems also never thought of them as being secret or with a low profile. Their main point was support, safeguarding satellite data and keeping enemies from eavesdropping on any sensitive orbital information. However, since the world's army first settled in space, the controls got longer fingers. The space domain now has a defense side, and within it, the US Space Force is taking and expanding responsibility. Sources familiar with the system describe how it operates. An automatic flag is sent via a secure operations channel when a trigger event occurs. For example, an unexplained object, a trajectory anomaly, or a sudden luminosity surge. The guillotine then isolates the affected feeds. Civilian interfaces are immediately disabled, and they are replaced with generic placeholders like operational security or data under review. Meanwhile, encrypted copies of the same data are discreetly transmitted to military analysts through the closed networks. The changeover takes place so rapidly that the very astronomers on the site may not even realize the exact moment of the transition until their monitors go static. Blackouts always have an echo, but the echo is not visible. If one has access to these so-called echo signals, namely data transfer logs, server routing tables, and access tokens, there are hints from the moment when the control shifts from civilian to military operators. However, this information is highly confidential, and the data is stored in encrypted form in an intranet, which is accessible to very few people outside the army. According to the official reasoning, the easy fact is that at the time when nations are controlling the same sky to carry out spying operations, there still needs to be a part of the information that remains restricted. However, the rationale might be seen as a veil hiding the very thing that the Guangdao power plant wants to be recognized for, its transparency. But even the best-kept secrets leave traces, and soon, fragments of truth began leaking through official documents and frustrated scientists' emails. The fight for the sky. When the blackout lifted, the sky looked normal again. Feeds resumed, dashboards updated, and NASA's official reports spoke in calm, technical tones. But behind that polished surface, the damage was already spreading. The scientific community was fractured, a silent war brewing between those sworn to secrecy and those who refused to stay quiet. What began as a 48-hour data blackout had become a turning point for space science itself, one that forced the world to ask a question few had ever dared. Who controls the truth about what happens above our heads? The first cracks appeared in the paperwork. Freedom of Information Act requests filed by journalists and astronomers started returning strange documents, internal emails, heavily redacted, with whole paragraphs blacked out. But even what survived was revealing. A message dated July 3rd, 2025, from JPL Flight Operations read, "Recommend 3I/A TLAS, data flagged for internal use only. 6-hour embargo pending risk confirmation." The phrase sounded procedural, but it was the first public hint that Space Force had restricted data before the blackout even began. This wasn't a reaction, it was preparation. A second memo surfaced weeks later, signed by Major Everson from Space Force Orbital Operations. It stated bluntly, "Data will be harmonized with civilian networks unless in conflict with operational requirements." That single clause, "unless in conflict," was the loophole that gave the military carte blanche to lock out NASA, the Minor Planet Center, and even partner observatories. Meeting minutes released months later confirmed what many suspected. NASA's own communications office pushed for transparency but was overruled in a closed-door vote, citing national security alignment. The blackout was not an accident of policy, it was the policy. Deep in the locales of the Minor Planet Center, where the most exacting celestial data are received, total frustration was building up. The staff's emails spoke of absent observation times, tardy uploads, and full spectral datasets put under the mark, temporarily restricted. In the past, telescope updates were always available in real time. The year was closing, and the discussion was at its peak in the philosophical aspect. People like scientists, journalists, and politicians were even seated in the first row to solve the unsolved question till then. A. Is it possible that anyone has the right to own the sky? B. If the discovery process is restricted by categorization, can the knowledge still be considered as free? Each and every voice was coming up with the same anxiety feeling, the one that says that it is human to be afraid, and it is also human to live in the light. The story behind 3I/ATLAS was not only a strange universal event, but it also pointed out to mankind the mildness of open policy, the swiftness with which the absence of truth can take over, and the price to be paid for losing the light that was lit by the universe's source of all knowledge. Because the next time there is an object in the sky, no one will be interested in whether it is going to be seen or not, but if the privilege to see it is given to humans. The 3I/ATLAS blackout wasn't a glitch. It was a mirror, showing how fragile the line between science and secrecy has become. If you believe the truth about our universe shouldn't vanish,